Good evening and welcome to the Snake River Dinner Hour webinar. My name is Martha Campos, Engagement and Communications Coordinator at Save Our Old Salmon Coalition. Thank you all for joining the Snake River Dinner Hour, Salmon Grain, How to Keep Our Plates Full Responsibly. Tonight's topic will highlight the Pacific Northwest connection to both agricultural food sources and salmon, and supporting sustainable food systems in the Columbia-Snake River Basin for generations to come. While we cherish the foods of the Northwest, Snake River salmon and steelhead are struggling to survive in large part due to the 4 deadly dams on the lower Snake River. For over 50 years, our region has spent tens of billions of taxpayer dollars on maintaining the 4 aging dams and on mitigation efforts. Yet 13 Columbia Snake River Basin salmon and steelhead populations, including 4 Snake River populations, are listed as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act and remain at risk for extinction. We must restore the Columbia-Snake River Basin as quickly as we can to ensure a future that will include salmon on the dinner table. It is my pleasure to introduce our dinner host for tonight, Lisa McShane. Lisa is on contract with American Rivers and is the principal of Blue Spruce Strategies. Thank you all for joining tonight.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you all for being with us this evening. We are going to talk about grain and salmon, as Martha said. They feed our communities. We value all of the food produced in our region, but the status quo is driving the Columbia-Snake River native fish to the brink of extinction. How do we find and bring that balance back to the river? What does abundance and prosperity look like in the Pacific Northwest? And that's our conversation. And I invite Kat Brigham and Dave Johnson and Amy Grondin and Brian Jones to join me in the conversation. Why don't you each take just a couple of minutes? Just want to welcome you to the dinner party we're having here. And just share a few words about yourselves, and then we'll get into talking about abundance. Kat, do you want to go first?
As you know, as you may not know, I've been in tribal politics for a very long time, and during my 47 years in tribal politics, I have worked very hard to rebuild Columbia River salmon. And the reason is because of my grandfather, Sam Cash. He was a tribal leader. And because of my family, we're all traditional fishers on the Columbia River. And I have my husband who fished at Celilo for when he was 5. I've got 3 daughters, 6 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren who are actually doing fishing on the Columbia River when the tribal regulations say we can go fishing. And I have 1 new great-grandson who's a month old today, and he's going to be fishing as well.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
I always feel like you're one of my neighbors because I'm originally from the Tri-Cities. Dave, do you want to just share a few things about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Dave Johnson. I'm the Fisheries Department Manager for the Nez Perce Tribe. I've had this job since 2002, somewhere in there. I've worked for the tribe off and on since 1983. I've also worked for the Forest Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I've got like Kat, hi Kat, but I've got lots of grandkids too, and we too have got a great grand and another one on the way here pretty quick. Happy to be with you tonight, and interested in having this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks. And we'll stay with Eastern Washington. And Brian, can you tell us just a little bit? Also, I have to mention, I have just one grandson. He's 3.
Yes, thank you for having me and being able to join this panel. I grew up on the farm here, and we raised wheat, cattle, and sheep over the decades. And I don't have any grandchildren. I have an adopted grandchild, I guess. But I have some nieces and nephews, which are pretty cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Grondin. My husband and I are commercial fishermen, and we live in Port Townsend, Washington, when we're not on the water. I've been working in the fishing industry since about 30 years, some part-time, some of the time in Alaska, and some of the time in Washington. And really happy to be here and talk about salmon and wheat.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So the first question I wanted to ask you all to just talk about generally is the question really tonight is about abundance and prosperity. We have, we feed the world, but salmon and steelhead are on the brink of extinction. And what does abundance and prosperity in the future look like to you?
You want me to get started?
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay, abundance to me means that, we're going to have fish in the Columbia River Basin as a whole for generations. And we're looking at this for generations because we're looking at salmon. Well, we have our first foods, and it's also part of the basin is our salmon, our water, our salmon, our big game, our roots and our berries. All of these are in the Columbia River Basin. And all of these are traditional foods. And part of this is our cultural. And this is what we do today. And this is what we want to do tomorrow. And so we're planning for the future generations to make sure that our children and our children's children will be able to have all of these first foods in the Columbia River Basin. But I also think it's important to remember that when we talk about our first foods, we're also talking about the Pacific Northwest, because I know during the fish wars, we got into a huge, big fight over the 50-50 allocation. And we survived it, but at the same time, it's important to remember that 50% of the harvestable fish goes to non-Indians as well. So we're fighting for the Pacific Northwest, and we want to do a collaborative partnership approach to find solutions. So abundance to me is having salmon, our big game, our roots, our berries in the Columbia River Basin for future generations for all of us. Thank you.
May I go next? Because I really love a lot of the things that Kat said there. As a commercial fisher, salmon are so important to me. And if we don't take care of salmon, I don't have a job next year. So it's like fishermen of their own volition are some of the strongest supporters of sustainable salmon catch and replacing habitat and all those wonderful things. Success and abundance for me would look like our coastal economies having a chance to bound back with more salmon. There would be more opportunity for the folks on the coast, the communities, not just the fishermen themselves, the people that call those communities themselves home, that they would also be making a living off the salmon that would be coming and returning to the Snake River. And as they do that, they pass right by the Washington coast. So for me, success would be see a rebound of the economy on the coast, that in part due to salmon and the jobs that they create besides just fishing, but also that everyone who creates food in Washington State would be successful and have a good job. I'm a small scale food producer, my husband and I. It's just the two of us on a boat. I would never want to see another small scale food producer inland go out of business because there's a choice between fish or wheat, wine, and vegetables. I think we can have it all. And I love that this group here today are working on it. And I would love to get more people into this conversation so we can find out what everyone needs and do our best to make that happen.
Thank you, Amy. I would echo your sentiment, both you and Kat. Abundance is not only having, to me, is not only having a large quantity of something, but a large quantity of fish for the native tribes, a large quantity of fish for fishermen on the Washington coast. And as farmers, I want to have that quantity of abundance in that I can continue to sell grain and move grain the way I need to thrive in my industry. But I think very often one of the things, and maybe the most important thing, is nature. Kat, you touched on this. We have to have the diversification of nature to fill out and keep complete the circle of life, if I have to say that, so that not only we can thrive from fish and wheat and all the other things that go along with it, but also so nature can stay healthy. And in this difficult time on our planet, we need to keep our planet healthy.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, well, there's a couple. So first of all, there's a definition, if you will, that's been tossed around as being healthy and abundant. It's a number that was arrived at by a group, a collaborative group that was convened by NOAA Fisheries to identify what the historical numbers were, and then what it is that we should be shooting for as a goal. Now we know that in the snake, especially where we're at, is way below the number that you need to delist populations. So we're very low. The numbers that we're shooting for instance, for spring Chinook, there were 1 million spring Chinook that came back into the snake. This year, we're expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000. And so the abundance change right now is really drastic. But the numbers that we would be shooting for, as described by NOAA, is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 200, 300,000 fish into the Snake River Basin. But and those numbers, I don't have them right on the top of my head, but it's in that ballpark. But please, there is a reference that you can link into, and it's from NOAA. It's about the Columbia Basin Collaborative, and they have established those things. But I think for it's not just those numbers; it's where the fish go to. So the tribes reserve the right to fish through this vast amount of country. Speaking for the Nez Perce in the Snake River Basin, and so the Nez Perce tribe reserved the right to fish at all these areas that it had always fished. And in exchange or as part of the treaty that the tribe ended up ceding 13 million acres of land to the United States, the tribe reserved the right to harvest fish in all these areas, and the United States agreed with it. So it's not just a number for abundance, it's actually a place to go. You should be able to go and fish in these areas, where the United States still owns the land. Most of this land that the tribe ceded to the U.S. is owned by the United States. It's federal lands, it's Forest Service lands, in no small part. And so you would think that the United States, in meeting its commitments, would try and ensure that it lives up to its part of the bargain and has the fish there. So that's really what's important relative to, in addition to numbers. It's having a place that those fish belong and that they should return to.
That's really helpful context. Thanks, Dave. I wanted to share with you, I don't know if I don't think I said this already, but why I care so much about this issue. I'm from that area, and my great-grandparents settled a wheat farm near Connell, just north of the Snake River, and it's a great wheat farm. It's very productive. I'm proud of the work my cousin does, and and they do still ship wheat on the Snake. And at the same time, I've lived my adult life on the West Coast. I'm on Samish Island right now. You can see the trees behind me. And most of my life in Bellingham. And so many of my friends, when we moved here in the 80s, were in the fishing industry. And almost nobody is now. So many of my friends at Lummi Nation and Nooksack were able to feed their families and feed their community and make a living fishing. And almost nobody now. There's a crab fishery there. It's very limited. And so I've seen things do well in one region and things take a nosedive in the other. And I just think we can do better. I think we can still get wheat to market, and we can bring these runs back. And I want to pivot to a question somebody asked, just so we get this out there. Somebody said that they've heard the reference to salmon runs on the brink of extinction several times tonight. Pretty sure I said it at least once. And this person says, and yet the sockeye salmon runs in 2023 exceeded their 10-year averages. And today there is an active spring king salmon fishery open today on the Snake. How can they be on the brink of extinction with active fisheries? And Dave, obviously I want you to answer this, but first I just want to say that my understanding is four sockeye returned. Is that last year? You know, average doesn't mean much if the average is 1 or 2. Yeah, 4 would exceed that average, but it's that four sockeye salmon coming back when there used to be tens of thousands. That's a difference. Okay, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a a question that should come up. Why is it that these fish are in trouble when there is a harvest on these fish? And so the fish that people are fishing on right now are largely fueled by hatcheries. The tribe, we produce like 12 million fish a year from hatcheries. We produce a third of the total of the fish that are released in the Snake River Basin. We grow fish for that purpose, to fuel a fishery, for tribal fishermen, for non-tribal fishermen out in the ocean and return. So, but the question still remains is relative to the wild runs. The wild runs are still 7,000, 8,000 fish. That's it. There are no targeted fisheries on those wild runs. And again, you got to look at the amount of habitat in the Snake River Basin that can support these runs, these returns of 1 million spring Chinook. That habitat is still there. The Nez Perce made a treaty that there would be fish returning to all those areas, not just in front of a hatchery wrap. It's to return to these areas. Again, the United States has the land. We all benefit from that. We all benefit in so many ways. If it wasn't federal land and it's now private land, the same thing. There's lots of benefit from people who live and own that land. But the tribes had that right to fish there. And tribes can't when those fish aren't returned. So it's a matter of I guess historical context about what was reserved. It was the right to fish in these areas, and those areas just don't have fish.
And what were the rough historic numbers of salmon that the Snake River once produced? Do you just roughly?
Let's see, like I say, there was about 1 million springers, and then you can go down the line from that. There's 500,000 fall Chinook, 200,000 coho, 84,000 sockeye, and 600,000 steelhead. These were the numbers that were put together by the Columbia Basin Collaborative, and it was in the areas that those fish return to now. So it doesn't include areas that are dammed, like upstream of Hell's Canyon Complex. It doesn't include that. It doesn't include upstream of Dorchester. It includes the extent habitat. And there is a correction too. I want to mention this on the in the start of this presentation. It describes there are 13 species of fish that are listed as endangered in the snake. There are 4 species. The 13 number refers to the entire Columbia. So there are 4 species in the Snake River that are listed as endangered species.
Thanks, appreciate that. Do you, from your perspective, sorry, Kat, just one last thing. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I just want to add, first of all, Davis actually saying a few things I forgot to say. And one is that, when we signed our treaty, he was right. We signed a treaty that said we had the right to fish at all our usual and custom areas. And we did that because our forefathers were thinking about our future generations. And to this day, that's what a lot of tribal leaders think about, is the next 7 generations and beyond, and trying to make sure that we are able to fish in at all our usual and custom areas. And I know for the Umatilla tribe, we have tributaries on the Snake River that we have fisheries on too. So, so you have to kind of be aware of the tribes, and there are success stories that the tribes have done to rebuild the habitat, to make the water colder, clearer, temperatures, good, better water quality. And yet these solutions are not being shared as much as they should be. I mean, I can just think of the Yakima River Integrated Plan that was years in court. And then after they finally started talking to each other, they came to a solution. And that solution is for them to have that partnership, that collaboration, to work together to rebuild salmon runs within the Yakima Basin. And that's what that 6 sovereigns agreement is talking about: collaboration, partnership, and seeking solutions to move forward on how we can work together. We don't have all the answers, and I guess I better make sure everybody understands. I'm not the chair of CTYR anymore. I am just a tribal member who has some knowledge of these things, and Dave can go back and get a tribal position, but I'm just me. But we have a lot of stories, a lot of success stories, and we don't share them enough, I guess, to say, this is done through collaboration and partnership. And each tribe has a success story. And yes, there are times when we have to, because we always have our treaty in our back pocket, but at the same time, we work for collaboration and partnership to seek a solution.
Thanks, Kat. That's a great perspective. Amy, do you think it's fair to say salmon are on the brink, sockeye salmon are on the brink of extinction?
I don't pay as much attention as to sockeye salmon as I do other species that I actually work with. And I think it is fair and safe to say that they are on the brink of extinction just because of the numbers that you had said about the return of 3 or 4 fish. I'm not even sure how those 3 or 4 fish actually even spawn to create a next generation. But yeah, I think it's I think it's a really challenging question, and it's one I want us all to come together and solve. And one of the things that I think is really important, I think, like on the screen right now, we're representative of the tribes are represented, and they are the co-managers of our commercial fisheries, and we thank them for the work that they do. Brian as a farmer and me as a fisherman. What I think what's missing here are the general public and the people who are asking the questions today, because everybody who lives in this state impacts how salmon are going to survive or not survive just by the way that the things that they do every day, whether it's washing their car in their driveway instead of using a car wash, because the runoff from that will go right into your watershed and like off into the ocean and affect the salmon. Just how many chemicals you may or may not put on your lawn, all kinds of things. So we all have our own impact on salmon, whether or not we choose to fish them, catch them, or eat them. And we all need to be cognizant of that and do what we can to be part of the solution. So it's not just the farmers and not just the fishermen and the power folks and all the other people who enjoy the services from from the Columbia River. We all need to stand up and be responsible for our own actions and remember that we can, we can be part of the solution as well.
Thanks, Amy.
No finger shaking involved, just a reminder that, if you live in Washington, you live in salmon country, and we need to take care of the habitat.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy.
We should talk a bit about barging versus rail and so for, an overview, Washington State is currently working, they've hired a contractor and they are analyzing what that looks like in the future. If the barges come off the river, what is the right place for rail? How do we move forward there? Brian, you have told me that you ship by rail. You're not that far from the Snake, right? Did you ever ship by barge?
Oh, yes, we did. When the dams were put in, the rail was abandoned for the most part, all the small communities around me, and everyone shipped by barge. The practicality of that, however, comes into question over the decades, in that why would a farmer in Spangle drive a semi and ship his grain to Central Ferry? He can now ship his grain to McCoy and Rosalia, a third of the distance, and get twice as many loads of grain in every day. Obviously, grain companies are seeing the opportunity to install rail. We've now got several in the area, and I see the future is being bright in that we have an opportunity to rebuild these lines and bring them together eventually farther down, farther west, maybe Tri-Cities or wherever it's appropriate, but put new rail lines into Colfax or Pomeroy, and use the rail lines and the rail beds that are still currently exist. For me, I'm here at Dusty. I've got just a very short haul to the Dusty elevator, and that company moves their grain both by rail and by barge. But it's not up to me how I move my grain. I sell my grain to a grain company, and they look for the best financial opportunity and the opportunity to ship that grain in a timely manner. Barges have, there's a period every year where dams are used for maintenance or come up for maintenance, and they can't ship by barge. So rail becomes the only method. So yes, I really think that we have a great opportunity here to start shipping by rail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking over there's some good questions coming in. By the way, if you've got a great question, drop it in the Q&A. Somebody, and maybe you can answer this one too, because I think, so one of the things that I understand to be true, and I would love some clarifying from you, Brian, that the wheat that is shipped by rail or barge is not irrigated, right? So there's the irrigated crops are quite different from the crops that ship by barge. These are not the same things. They're separate
Correct.
issues, right? Yeah.
Correct. This is a dryland wheat country, and we don't irrigate this, and it's a long ways before you get to irrigated wheat. And the opportunity others farmers have with irrigation is they can raise a whole host of other crops besides just wheat.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, Kat and Amy, also, one of the, things that we had talked about last week together, was, the nutritional value of salmon and, what does it do to, a people who, since time immemorial, had salmon as a primary part of their diet, and then it's gone. It's largely gone. Can you talk a little bit about what that, your understanding of, any, problems that might cause, just to the people involved?
Well, not having our salmon on a daily basis impacts our health. Because so many times that's all we ate was salmon. Our first foods was one of our first foods. And when we started seeing the decline of salmon and people not being able to get it as much, we started having health problems. So not having our first foods is definitely has an impact on our health. But it's not only our health, it's our culture, our history, and our future. And so, I'm not sure anyway or how to explain it other than it is a huge problem and we are not able to have our salmon. And I will say that, I was really proud when the state of Oregon adopted 175 grams per day for the state of Oregon, because it used to be 17.5. But the state of Washington and Oregon are still have not adopted a fish gram per day simply because of the politics. But this is improving water quality so our salmon can survive, so we can survive. And as I stated in our preview, one of the questions that was asked when the pulp industry came forward and said, what you're asking us to do is to put millions into cleaning up the water. And our question was, what are you going to tell your child or your children when they can't drink that water?
Yeah.
And so they did not oppose the 175 grams per day in the state of Oregon. And we did not have businesses go away. But at the same time, as Amy was talking about, all of these things are linked together. I mean, our habitat, our air, our water, everything is linked together. And so when you look at salmon, you're looking at, as some of people have said, the canary of the Northwest, and like for the birds in the mines, when there's no air, they're gone. Well, if we don't have good, clean water, our salmon are gone, but so are we.
Just for a little background, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kat, but those when you're talking about the amount of grams of fish that someone eats a day, that's from the EPA and how they decide how many parts per million can be, how polluted our water can be. So the average American would only eat fish maybe once a week, and that would probably be exceptional. But if you live in the Pacific Northwest, and especially if you are a member of a tribal nation, you eat a lot more salmon than once a week. So that's where the parts per million becomes, in the pollution of the water to the amount of fish we're eating becomes so important, because fish bioaccumulate toxins in their bodies. So we want them to be swimming in as clean water as we can, because they're food for everybody. So
Thank you, Amy.
yeah. But we're a team here, Kat. So so, oh my gosh, I'm really thankful that you and Dave are here to help tell our stories and things, because it is a partnership, and I so appreciate all that you folks do. So yeah, and that's one other thing. Just since we're talking about eating, I always tell it might be silly, but I catch salmon and I eat it, but it's not a meal until I have wheat and vegetables and a glass of wine maybe, or a piece of bread with it. So we need all our food producers in Washington to be successful. It's really not a case of us against them. It's like, can we all figure this out? Because most people don't know that commercial salmon fishermen, they're not our permits that we have to fish. They're only allowed to be owned by individuals. So they're not owned by big business or corporations. So every fishing boat that's out on the water fishing for salmon is a small family business. They're not corporations. They're not big factory trawlers like you might find in Alaska. So it's just we're mom and pops. It's Greg and me and a deckhand for part of the season. So we're pretty small scale businesses, and I get the feeling that maybe there are a lot of large businesses that are looking at the irrigation issues, and they may have more money to make decisions to do things that will help them stay in business. But quite honestly, we have fish, and that is our lifeline for our business. And yeah, I can't put a price on how important it is to save them. And then if somebody who has more access to more capital can help us solve this problem so we can all stay in business, I would really love that. So it's for instance, I know that some of the larger farms get subsidies from the government, and but those subsidies aren't they don't exist for commercial fishing. If we have a bad year, we have a bad year, and we start working lots of extra jobs to try to fill in the gaps. So I don't know why we don't have subsidies for fishing, but to be quite honest, I think subsidies create a crutch that people get used to, and it gets very comfortable, and you don't have to find a solution because you have a backup plan there. So maybe we need to change more than just our dams to help make this thing work. So.
And you're right. As a farmer, I know that I do pay for the insurance that I have, but I always hope that I do not have a bad year, because even maybe at the best, I will get 75% of what my average yield might be. And it's not great. Nobody likes to see have a fail in their on their crop, but at the same time, it is something that was decided a long time ago in the Dust Bowl, and to support farmers when crops were in terrible shape and the weather didn't cooperate. And so we benefit from that. And we certainly do benefit from, in a lot of cases, economic power to create the kind of world and conditions that we need for successful farming. On the other hand, you're on the other end of the stick where you're not receiving those subsidies. You're not getting the benefits of salmon. And I think that, we could change things enough so that we could all benefit. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And certainly we all know that everybody should eat some fish every week. And we all wish we could eat a little more than that. But anyways.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brian. And people may have heard in years that the fishing due to nature hasn't been good, Congress may declare a disaster year for us. And when you have a disaster year, it takes a couple of years to get the money because Congress has to go through and do all these things. If our fisheries declared a disaster, we might not get that money for 2 years. And so until we get disaster money in the occasion that a fishing complete season was called a disaster, you still may lose your shirt and your boat and everything else because the money doesn't come through quick enough. And that is like a very rare thing. And it is like, it's not like a subsidy that like you could buy the insurance like you were talking about, Brian, and then know that you would have some coverage if things went wrong for you as an individual. So
I know for the tribes, we've never received a subsidy or any help at all for when we have a disaster season. I mean, we just have to live through it. And so seriously, when we can't go fishing, we don't have nothing. We just have to survive.
I didn't realize that the non-tribal got the disaster relief. So it's something to look into too.
Now, like I said, I've been around here a long time ago, and I remember a question that was asked a long time ago as to when you don't go fishing, how much money do you want? And we found out later they were asking the question because they wanted to buy us off the river.
Mm.
And our response was, our treaty rights are not for sale. And so we've kind of never looked for a subsidy because we don't want people saying, we paid you to get off the river, because that's not going to happen.
Mm. That makes sense.
That's a very good
Kat.
point.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thanks for
I want to
explaining
go
that.
back to a little bit about, what Amy and Brian are talking about, the connection, because it's really important. Representative Simpson in 2021 presented a bill that looked at the basin as a whole. Yes, he was
Yeah.
looking at Snake River, but he was looking at the basin as a whole. But he was also looking at how we could do this together. And I think that's really important. And the 6 sovereigns looked at that draft, and we said we could do this, and we had a really quick time frame in which to try to get this pulled together because we wanted to get the budgets, But at the same time, we recognized that tribes can't do it alone. Neither can the states, and neither can the feds, and neither can the stakeholders. All of us have to start looking at how do we work together to make this a better basin for our children's children. And one of the things that, I've said several times is you're a part of the solution or you're part of the problem. You make the choice as to what you're going to tell your children when they ask, how come I can't harvest any salmon? How come I can't go fishing anymore? How come I can't drink this water? How come I can't get wheat from this area? All of this is important to the Columbia River Basin. And because it's important to the Columbia River Basin, we need to figure out how to work together through the collaboration and partnership approach and seek a solution for all of us to move forward and survive in the Columbia River Basin as a whole.
Yeah, when you talk about the 6 sovereign solution, is that the agreement that the Biden administration just signed into inside? I don't know if they signed it into law, but they made it. They worked with you folks to make
You're
that
right.
happen. That's
In February. Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty thankful that that happened because it does, like I said, start to pull us together and provide some funds to make that happen. Because like the fishermen don't have a lot of, at least the non-tribal fishermen like me, we don't have a lot of money to put into like these agreements, and they do take a lot. So I'm incredibly thankful that that was done. So there are some funds to help, our states in the
Right.
Pacific Northwest move ahead and work with, the tribal nations to get this thing done, and the farmers and all the other folks.
We talked a little bit about subsidies, and I can see the national importance of making sure farmers, farmers and honestly fishers stay in business year over year despite difficult years. But there are some subsidies that just I've never understood, and to me they make no sense. And I want to ask Dave about how are salmon, are we really barging and trucking salmon around the dam? Like, what is going on and who's paying for that? It just seems nuts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we are. So
We are, okay.
we are. We barge fish past the dams here in the Snake in the spring. And then in the fall, for the most, or the summer, we mostly move those via trucks. So the schedule for those is there are 3 dams on the Snake River that collect fish and barge them. That's Lower Granite, Little Goose, and Lower Monument. And the collection for spring chinook for fish that are moving down now, that really goes through starting April 21st and it ends June 20th. So there's really a couple routes of passage. Either you get barged, they go through the bypass system and they get barged, or they go through the turbines, or they go over the spill. And so those are the 3 routes of passage. So we barge fish in that spring as the spring migrants go out. As fall Chinook go out during the summer, there aren't that many fish leaving, so those fish are also collected at the bypass systems and they're trucked downriver. And then fish are also trucked from downriver and brought upriver. So you may know, but lamprey really are probably one of the most endangered species, even though they aren't listed that way under the Endangered Species Act. They really are just barely hanging on. So what we do, the tribes primarily will go down to Bonneville or to the Dalles Dam and pick them up in the fishways, in the fish ladders, put them in a truck and bring them up. So fish go upstream and they go downstream with either barge or truck.
Dave, can I ask a question if you don't mind? When you barge a fish, it's my understanding that part of the reason a salmon returns to its place of birth is because it senses somehow all of the elements that it has to go through to get to its place of birth, and it senses those elements all the way down through the river system. But when you put a fish in a barge, I think of myself being thrown in a trunk of a car and being driven 400 miles and then being told to just go home. It seems, I don't know how that would work as well as it. What's the issue? Am I way off base?
No, you're right about that. I mean, the amount of strain that occurs, especially with steelhead that are barged, is it's very high, and so those fish do have a hard time finding their way back. But I do got to say something about these transportation routes. What we find is that the fish who are leaving, who have good in-river conditions, so that is they're spilled for the most part. They aren't really transported. They aren't. They don't go through the turbines. Those fish have the best survival. That's why we're spilling these fish. We still want to hedge our bets, and we will still barge some of those fish. And as flows as they diminish during the year, the in-river conditions are not as good for those fish because you still have concrete, still have a reservoir, and letting the fish go on downstream, left to their own devices, and in those conditions that are becoming increasingly adverse, it's better to put the fish in the barge and send them down there. So, but the best survival we've had is with the fish that are spilled, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah,
If
that
you had a
makes
natural
sense.
river, of course, you wouldn't have that same kind of situation as fish.
Dave, could you help me remember? Maybe I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but when the dams weren't in place, how long did it take for a juvenile salmon to get to the coast? Because that's one of the things is the health of the fish is based on the speed at which it can get downstream, correct?
Yes. So if you just look at the comparison between barge and historically, so the barge trip from Lower Granite down to below Bonneville, it takes about 40 hours to do that. Fish who were historically moving, it took them about 2 to 4 days to swim. And for under current conditions, with fish migrating in river, it takes about 10 to 30 days. So it takes about a month for those fish to get downriver in current conditions if they aren't barged, and they just have to go without the advantages of spill.
And that's okay. Yeah, that exposes them to the high temperatures and lots of opportunity for predation from like other fish or birds or
Pelicans.
opportunity to get disease, all
Yeah.
of these things, pelicans,
It
exactly.
does.
So those
And
poor
then
little fish don't
you
stand a
have to
chance.
consider the physiology of these fish.
Yeah.
When they're smoking, they have a certain amount of reserves in their body, and it's like you buy groceries for a 2-day trip, and it turns out that it's a month. So your reserves, your groceries really are kind of depleted by the time you get there, and that puts the fish in pretty bad shape when they do reach the ocean.
Yeah.
It's that extended travel time with all the adverse conditions that you're talking about.
Yeah. Thank
Can
you.
you talk about the hot water in the like the how hot the reservoirs get? Like is that what impact does that have on the salmon? My understanding is that it's lethal.
It certainly has been lethal. It's been lethal for fish, primarily for fish coming upriver in the summer, fall snook and coho, sockeye. In 2015, it was a big die-off of hundreds of thousands of sockeye coming upriver. And so those conditions are really bad for the fish. With the Snake River, there's a dam. It's Dorshak Dam. It's on reservation, and it's a very deep flood control dam. Water's released out of that dam to ameliorate conditions in the Snake River during that really hot time of the year. So the Snake River itself is pretty darn warm, and it's a barrier for fish coming upstream. So if we can release some cool water, it helps make that passage possible.
It's really interesting. Saber wild salmon has they track the water temperatures over the summer, and it's really fascinating to see how quickly that water does get hot and the impact that it has on those juvenile salmon when they're trying to return. It's if you're looking at graphs and grids, it's kind of breathtaking. So
one of the things that one of our success stories for the Umatilla tribe is, developing a river vision, and that river vision turns the river back to its natural state. And I'll say that for the Umatilla River, one of the tributaries, Meacham Creek, the railroad put dikes up there and pushed the creek onto the west side of the canyon. And when we worked with not only the Union Pacific Railroad, but we worked with Oregon Forestry, we just had a number of partners. And we were able to create our river vision within that creek. And once we got all of the project completed, we put the river or the creek back into the meandering state, and we got 14 springs that popped up that were not there before because the water was not there. We also cooled down the temperature. We got colder water. We got clear, better quality water. So, like I said, there are success stories, and the River Vision is one of them for CTUIR. But there are other success stories that tribes have, and I know Dave has success stories too. And we're just not able to get everybody's support to move forward on some of the things that we've done to help the habitat. So not only for our salmon, but for all of our first foods and the air and the water quality. And so that's why we're really pushing for a collaboration and partnership, because like I said, you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution.
I also think it's important to remember too that there are things that we need to do to solve all of these problems, whichever side you're looking at. But we need to do so many things all at once. You don't just do one step and see what that takes. We're at a point where we need to work on restoring habitat. We need to cool the water. We need to work on rail. We need to work on energy and recreation all at the same time. We've run out of time to just try one thing and see if it works. So it's important to remember that that's why we need so many people involved in the solution, so we can find out what people need, what anything needs, nature, environment, all of those things. And it's also, I think, a bit of a myth out there too that we can't work on the Columbia River Basin and the Snake River at the same time we're trying to restore Puget Sound and the salmon there. So I think sometimes people are talking about one or the other, and it's kind of like the farmers and the fishermen. We're not just going to fix one or the other. Puget Sound is a different issue, but that doesn't mean we don't work on it because we're concerned about the dams and the Snake River. We need to look at this holistically rather than piecemeal things together. So
Absolutely. I think I would love any final thoughts.
I'll be really short because I think Amy and Brian and Dave have, made some really good statements. And, this is not a a one issue. I mean, it's not just about salmon. It's about our water quality, our air, our land, its habitat. I heard about the salmon cycle, but we have a water cycle. We people have a cycle. Everything is linked together, and I think that's really important because a lot of our elders, and I remember learning from the elders, is that when we look at things, we look at how everything is linked together, and it is a circle. It is not a straight line. It is a circle because we are all interlinked. And we need to figure out again how to work together to develop that collaborative approach in working forward for our children's children. Thank you. And I have enjoyed this dinner hour. Thank you.
I've enjoyed you being on. Dave, any last, with 1 minute.
Yeah, let me just say that, we didn't quite get to how much help we need on this issue, and that's really important for us. I mean, and that's what we're all about. We're looking for help on this. It's a big, weighty question. There's a lot of livelihoods, a lot of lives dependent on this, how we deal with it. And we're very interested in working with this together and trying to find some solutions from the experts. But we still have to say that the fish, the only way we're going to get anything resembling getting off of the endangered species list and that kind of thing is to breach the dams and to find some alternatives for the services that they provide. Otherwise, I mean, we've been doing this for a while and it's not working. So we're looking for help. We really need it, but the fish do need a river. Thanks.
Thank you.
My closing is very quick. I just want to say that my blue collar is green. I work a blue collar job, and when I'm not on the water fishing, I do everything I possibly can to help find a solution for salmon to survive, because I don't want to catch the last fish. Nobody I know wants to catch the last fish. We want to have everyone have their jobs and make an honest living and watch those salmon spawn and return, all those good things.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
Brian?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think we all can pitch in. I think we can work together. I think for agriculture, we have an opportunity here to make things new again for agriculture and let a system that doesn't seem to be working go by the wayside. And I look forward to helping move this process forward as much as I can in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you all for being on. It just was really delightful to listen to the conversation this evening. Thank you so much and have a good evening.
Thank you.